I'm actually embarrassed to say that this is Howard's first time at PdF, and given how much he has led the way in living in and exploring the virtual community and the smart mob, and bringing insights back from those explorations to the world that we all spend so much time in. You know, we should have had you here sooner. So I'm really thrilled to have you here. And what Howard and I talked, and instead of having him do a big formal presentation, we thought we'd sort of do more of a conversation, though I'm going to let him do as much of the talking as possible. And I asked Howard to really just listen and soak up all the previous talks and to some degree synthesize and back clean up. But there were two topics that we're going to get to. I had to write them down on my hand to remind myself. The first was the idea of, and this is Howard's word, of mindfulness. And I think what he meant by that is something about what we have to cultivate in ourselves individually and in ourselves as groups in the face of this overwhelming sea of information and networks and this web that we both use and is using and changing us. So tell us what you mean by mindfulness, Howard.
Well, it's a word that I think has spiritual connotations. That's really not what I'm talking about, although it applies there. I'm talking about directed attention. And there's increasing evidence from neuroscience that directed attention is the way the mind changes the brain. And it was a theme that emerged from what I heard today. And by the way, the reason I'm not doing a stand-up is because this is the smartest, most influential group I've been invited to speak to, and I wasn't sure at all what I know that you don't know. So this is my first time here, won't be my last time here. This is a group that has potential to exert an enormous amount of leverage on the way things go, and your people, we are people who want to exert leverage. We want to make things better, and I think you could pick this out from a number of themes, but Scott woke us all up. He got up and made a noise and said, "Wake up, close your laptops, turn your phones off." That has something to do with the kind of attentional exchange between a speaker and an audience. If you're up here, the channel for gauging that attention are eyeballs. And the problem is not that you think that you might be boring people to go off on Facebook. The problem is that you're not getting that feedback from eyeballs. It's something that anybody who teaches in a classroom has to confront. And he also reminded us to be mindful that just talking about things with each other is not sufficient to catalyze the kind of change that we're talking about, that you need to get out and meet each other and engage in the physical world, in the face-to-face work. And as you pointed out, a lot of groups of three can have an enormous impact eventually. So many movements that have had enormous impact have started out with groups of three. And I remember Eli Pariser talking about the filter bubble, and to be mindful of the fact that filters can be blinders, and that active attention is required on our part in order to make sure that the information that we are getting is not narrower and narrower. It's not going to automatically happen. And Susan Crawford bringing our attention back to the fact that we have to be mindful of the political situation regarding the regulation of the media that have enabled us to come together. It's not necessarily always going to be this free in all senses and productive. It's not always going to be a platform for those who don't already have wealth and power. that simply talking to each other without somehow having some influence on the wheels of power is not necessarily going to continue the kind of thinking that brings us to places like this. Recently, I'm sure that most of you have been aware of Nick Carr's article about links and the distraction of attention online. A number of people, Andrew Keen, Jaron Lanier, have written about the way our attention is diffused and wasted by the time we spend online. I'm noticing in my own day the tendency to wander. I think that the issue is not that the link is evil or that media are distracting, but that the time has come for us to begin to learn some discipline, some literacy of how we use our attention. When I'm talking to journalism students about it, I think it's very important for them to get into Twitter. 3 or 4 years ago when I started trying to get journalism students to Twitter, they were skeptical of it. I told them that they had to know how to tune it, and they needed to know how to find the signal, as Clay said, in that noise. It's really a matter of tuning your attention to find out what's happening out there, and you need to make a decision every time you see a link. Is this something I want to pay attention to at all? Is this something I want to open a tab for later today? Is it something I want to bookmark because I just don't have time for it, given the context, the attention, the mindfulness that I have about what I have to accomplish today? But it's something I'm interested in, and if I want to consult it later, I want to find it. I think that we have confronted literacy issues before. We mean historically the human race. The way we think, the way we organize and communicate with each other has changed radically with the phonetic alphabet, with the printing press. And in the aftermath, it's not the technologies that have been the most important, it's the literacies. It's both the skills of encoding and decoding and the social competencies that come with the entrance to those communities of literacy. So when I mean mindfulness, I think on the political scale that Susan was talking about, and on the scale of being aware of how social media is channeling our attention that Eli was talking about. And I think that Scott made a good point that we need to develop some norms about the way we pay attention to each other and the way we pay attention to our media at the same time. Something I'm experimenting with students. For example, I'm asking the students to come up with their own probes of attention in the classroom. I suggest, as an example, there are 60 students in this class. 5 of you can have your laptops open at any one time. It's up to you to decide. The point there is not to police them, but for them to become aware and direct their awareness somehow of what they're doing. Anyway.
Yeah. You know, but one of the things you were saying to me was that you used to be more optimistic about how we would adapt to this age, and that you've grown a little bit more concerned. It was your term many years ago that the internet would improve our crap detection abilities, right? And that if anything, and I think this is a quote I saw from you once, that it would be harder for authorities to get away with BS because we have now the crap detection ability, the ability to fact check your ass, if you will, that some blogger once said. It's in more hands and it's easier to deploy, but you're not so sure about that now. You think we need a class in crap detection 101?
Oh, absolutely. I wonder, and I fear, along with the concerns that Susan Crawford raised about the enclosure and control of media, I'm worried about the inundation of misinformation, disinformation, and bad information. I don't think we can, or anyone can, or should control the input of information. We wouldn't be here today if the barrier to entrance to putting information on the internet was not so low. I do think something that there is leverage that we can do something about is to help people determine whether the information that they're getting, the email they're getting, the website they're looking at is accurate or totally bogus. I actually started, well, I have to admit, having been around this for so long, I think pretty much everybody who got online in the 1980s was excited and enthusiastic about the future, and I confess that I was one of those people. I think that J.P. Barlow was another one of those people who propagated the line that's been attributed to John Gilmore, that the internet interprets censorship as damage and routes around it. We now know that you can buy a router that will censor for you the internet itself. We cannot project that kind of freedom onto the technology. The technology is malleable, it can be used, is effectively used by dictators and by others who want to control expression. About, I guess, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, my daughter started writing papers about the same time Alta Vista came out, the really first powerful search engine, and I felt it was my responsibility to sit down with her in front of the computer and say, look, you can take a book out of the library, you can disagree with that book, you can be pretty sure, not 100% sure, that if there are factual claims in that book, that somebody has been paid to check whether that's accurate or not. Put a term into a search engine, it's no longer up to the publisher or the editor or the author to guarantee the veracity of that information. It's up to you to check, to make sure that it's not totally bogus. And of course she said, I'm 12 years old, what do I do? It's not that hard. I said, look for an author. If there is not an author on that page, I would turn my credibility meter down a little bit, and I would weigh the lack of an author against the strength of the claims that they're making. And if there's not an author, there's an easy utility called Who Is that will enable you to find out who's responsible, who is claiming responsible for that website. And if you find an author, put that author's name in a search engine. How hard is that to do? And I think that there is a self-correcting mechanism. You need to be aware of it. That's where the mindfulness comes in. You have to check what other people have to say, and you have to look at who those other people are and why they're saying that. So a lot more responsibility for thinking critically about information than our educational system was giving my daughter, than our educational system is giving anybody's children these days. Our educational system, our schooling system, is very well tuned to creating good citizen workers for 19th and 20th century industries. It's not well tuned at all to preparing people for a world in which the authority of the text is gone, the responsibility for determining, I don't use the word truth, the degree of accuracy in what you're finding is now up to the individual. So when I started looking into how do you go about this, I came across this term, crap detection. It comes from Hemingway, who said that a good journalist requires an infallible crap detector. If you have ever been involved in any kind of serious medical condition for yourself or someone you care about, you know that the greatest source of great information is to be found among the other people who have this disease out there. And it's also the greatest source of information that can kill you if you don't vet it well. So we have, I think, the opportunity to begin exploring these literacies. And again, literacy, I think, just simply has to do with beginning to pay attention to the way that media are using us and the way that we are using media and the way we're deploying our attention.
Mm-hmm. We have about 10 minutes, and actually, if you have a question for Howard, quick, go to the mics, and let's see if we can't get a few raise your hand if I know you're actually going to ask one. Clay, you get the honor of the first question.
Great. I wanted to ask Howard on this subject of changed views from homesteading, from the original book, from the Homesteading Virtual Communities book from the early 90s. Surveying the landscape you see today, what's been the biggest surprise between the stuff you were looking at as this was just starting to come out in the public sphere in the early 90s and the world we're living in now?
I think we have a kind of amnesia for miraculousness of technologies. The untethering of media into these devices we carry with us was sort of visible. But the fact that, that we can stream video, and when I say we, I'm talking within the next decade, most of the people on Earth are going to be able to stream video from where they are. I think of, I wrote and illustrated a book on a fat Mac, which must have resulted in 5,000 disk swaps, and this little sound that goes, You have to take your disk out and put your disk back in. And then I was fascinated with being able to get down to the pixel level and click and change things. I could not have foreseen Photoshop at that point. That the change in the quantitative change in the capabilities of the media that are available to individuals has been an enormous qualitative change. Anybody who was into video when the Sony Portapack came out, and this was supposed to be the liberation of video from the big expensive studios, knows that after you put your heavy Portapack in a backpack with an expensive camera, you had to pay $100 an hour to edit it. I don't know how many months of video viewing are being uploaded per minute by 14-year-olds right now. Just the raw explosion of expressive capabilities is astonishing. And I think that gets back to what I've been talking about, and others have been talking about, the necessity for us to develop all kinds of filters. What you were talking about in terms of the signal to noise and collective action, the potential for collective action was obvious early in the modem days. The drawbacks, the collective action problems were not as obvious. Elinor Ostrom just won the Nobel Prize, surprisingly, because for economics, because she's a political scientist, because 10 years went by after Garrett Hardin wrote The Tragedy of the Commons before any scientist said, well, is it really true that humans will always despoil common pool resources, and looked at the evidence and found out that there is a certain percentage of groups of humans who manage common pool resources, and they do that by creating institutions for collective action. And I would take the mindfulness trope and apply it to collective action in that sense. An institution for collective action does not mean the government. In fact, Ostrom really had pushed me further towards the libertarian side by offering empirical evidence that arrangements that work best are the ones that are most local, the ones that emerge from norms that are agreed upon by people, rather than laws that are distantly enforced. She used the example of self-enforcement that lobstermen in Maine used, that there are a few spots where everyone knows you put your lobster traps there, you'll get a good catch. They just came up with an informal lottery among themselves, and it was your turn to put your traps out. There were no laws about this. If you put your traps out and it wasn't your turn, things would mysteriously happen to your nets. Then lobster ships that were capable of coming from other countries came, and that institution was destroyed. So I think we need to think of ways in which we can apply. Ostrom had 7 design principles that she noticed that were present in institutions for collective action that worked, that were not present in institutions for collective action that failed. It's not deterministic. But I think it indicates that if we are mindful about the ways we try to overcome some of these problems with people gaming the system, we may be able to take advantage of the mass availability of collective action through the net.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ophelia Mangin. I'm at NYU. And my question, within the framework that you're putting out there for literacy, maybe you could talk more about a difference between educating a group of people and disseminating information to them, and how that might work with
Difference between what and influencing?
Educating a group of people and disseminating information to them.
I'm sorry, my hearing ain't good.
Educating and disseminating.
Oh boy. Well, there's the old saying attributed to Shelley that education is an igniting, not a pouring. That's institutionally very difficult to do. To me, education means awakening the students to the possibility that they can inquire, and increasingly, and I think largely because of the media that we are embedded in, collaboratively inquire. And that I've had some experience, I definitely have some knowledge, I'm going to be there to help, I'm going to constrain the universe so that you don't have vertigo, I'm going to nudge you in the right direction when I see you starting there, but I'm not going to deliver it to you. I cannot deliver to you a body of knowledge that won't be obsolete by the time you graduate. So to me, education, I guess this is the old liberal arts, Reedy and me speaking. Education has to do with equipping people with the tools to learn how to do it themselves, not just delivering a body of knowledge to them. And I think the only antidote to being influenced without your consent is education, in the sense of looking into it. And I think really specifically looking into the way you are influenced by sources that you agree with. And one of the troubling things about conferences like this, and it's not a reflection of the conference, but a reflection of the political atmosphere in America, is how difficult it is to get more than just white lefties here. Somehow or another, we need to, on an individual and collective basis, learn how to listen to people who are not like ourselves, but we also, I think, need to be critical, not in a negative sense, but critical in a mindful sense of what is being sold to us by people whose beliefs we agree with.
Time for one more question. Go.
Great. Howard, to follow up, thank you very much. We're creating something called E-Ensemble, where nobody's in charge. It's going to be a worldwide talent pool based on actually getting things done that are broken out and defined very well, open source style. To your last point, often when we create solutions, whether we are white lefties or short Asian guys, we do it based on what we think is right, a structure that we think has worked for ourselves and we think it should work for everybody else. As we create that structure, we often create problems for other people who don't think or work like we do, don't feel like we do. And so one of the areas that I've asked people at MIT about is, can we focus on the human nature obstacles where we think we're being creative and actually we're destroying somebody else's perfectly good plan, like the people are already succeeding in the place where the, quote, problem or the challenge is. And so this is done in medicine. It's called positive deviance. Go find out what's working. Go ask them what's working. Not help, support what's working and ask them how you can be useful. It's a fundamentally different mindset, from university. And so I was wondering if you've found outbreaks of people who are saying, you show me what to do and mission control style, I will help, without imposing my cultural biases on what's needed.
Okay, well, there are a couple of issues here, but I want to start by saying that the most important idea is the idea that you need to listen before you talk about a solution to any kind of group that you're not a member of. But I think there's a fundamental issue, and I don't know what the solution to it is. I think you've heard me say many times that I think what's needed is enabling and teaching people to think for themselves. There is a very large constituency in the world who get very angry at teachers who try to tell their children to think for themselves, because they are not, in their cultural values, supposed to think for themselves. They're supposed to think the way their book tells them to think. So I think that there are a lot of clashes in the world without talking philosophically about values. I don't see how anyone is going to personally be successful online, or how the commons is not going to be totally polluted if people don't take a critical attitude towards information. So I think that's fundamentally a problem. But to answer your question, probably about 12 of the people who are here today were at the session that I was in with Jim Fishkin the other day. He has this great empirical method he calls deliberative polling that he's done all over the world. He's done it with the Central Committee in China. He did it with wind power in Texas. He's done it all over the world. The idea is to get a representative sample of the constituents, not just scientifically, demographically representative, but in terms of people's attitudes, and to poll them on what they think about the issue under discussion, and then to have a set of information that's vetted by all sides. It's a little bit like the neutral point of view process in Wikipedia. If you're talking about energy, you have constituents who wildly disagree with each other, but who can agree on what is valid information for their point of view. Valid information is then presented to this group of people. They are encouraged to deliberate in small groups, to question groups of experts, and then they are polled again. And the empirical evidence shows that after this process, their beliefs are closer to reality, closer to what all of the empirical evidence indicates than they were at the beginning. And ultimately, he's got this crazy utopian idea that Election Day ought to be a holiday, and that everyone in America ought to break up into these groups that are divided among people who don't agree with each other, and have this deliberation process. Wouldn't that be great? Gee, BP could pay for it.
That's a great thought to end on. Howard, you are a great teacher. It's a blessing to have you here. May your health continue to improve, and you be with us for a long time, and we'll have you back real soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.